going to discuss using the Concept 2 rowing ergometer to promote better rowing skills. The rowing ergometer has a lot of the same advantages that a single scull does, and that's why we like to call it the land single. One of the advantages, though, that the erg has that you don't get on the water is that you're guaranteed a safe, stable environment. You don't have to worry about the wind, the weather, the waves. You don't have to worry about the set. The ergometer is going to be stable, and the athlete's going to feel secure on the ergometer in a way that a novice in particular won't feel on the water. You've also got the advantage that it's very individualized. You can work with one athlete at a time on the ergometer without having 8 other athletes in an 8 sitting around losing their concentration or feeling bored. You can take the time to give that immediate feedback that the ergometer provides. Also, the ergometer will get you that feedback by virtue of the performance monitor and, when things are going correctly, by the sensation, the tactile sensations of the rowing stroke. Lastly, the ergometer is very non-threatening. You can make changes on the erg without worrying about how it's going to impact other elements of your stroke. You can ask the athlete to do something differently, and he or she doesn't have to worry about whether it's going to lead to catching a crab or hitting the person in front of them with their oar handle or losing time. So it provides a couple of very important elements for learning that are more difficult to acquire when you're out on the 8 and the water. Everything you're going to see today came from someone else. Nothing is going to be original to me. I'm merely sharing with you ideas that I've acquired from working with coaches like Charlie Butt and Harry Parker and Linda Murray and seeing how they've used different things to help their athletes become better. You can do the same thing in your own program by observing the other coaches in your boathouse or in your league or at your big competitions. You can also learn an awful lot from your athletes. Athletes are going to approach things differently, and that's been true for me when I've had the pleasure of working with Olympians Artie Samsonoff and Luke Walton and working with freshman novices who are trying the sport for the first time. Use the opportunity to work with others, to learn from others. Before we discuss exactly what we want to teach on the ergometer, we ought to think a bit about how an athlete learns a new physical activity. The learning curve for an athletic endeavor is not 100% sequential. We don't often master things in a set order. People tend to learn things unevenly. You take 2 steps forward, you might find a little regression. You have to come back to a point that you'd made earlier and you thought the athlete had already mastered. So as a coach, it's wise to think to yourself about how you want to approach this. Do you want to teach to a degree that they really do master a certain element of the stroke, and then once they've got that, you move on to a new element? Or do you want to expose your athletes to the complete rowing stroke, and then once you've achieved just a basic competency, increase their abilities evenly throughout the whole stroke? How you go about teaching the athlete is something that deserves a lot of attention. Ideally, you want to create an environment in which they can be successful. And for most of us, that means that you want to condense things and make the whole into smaller, more manageable pieces. You can do that mostly with drilling. You can do that also by making the task easier. So for instance, if you're trying to teach the rowing stroke, it can be really helpful to just have the athlete on the ergometer and rowing without the oar handle, or having the athlete on the ergometer taking 1 stroke at a time. When they can perform the desired motion well, then have the athlete use something other than the oar handle, a broomstick, a hockey stick, something like that to mimic the oar handle. Or if you've been doing it successfully with a pause drill, have them row 2 consecutive strokes or 3 consecutive strokes and then pause. Once they've got that, you can then try it with the oar handle, and then you can move on to continuous rowing. When they can do things continuously, then you can try it with some moderate pressure. And you can just build right on up. The idea is to increase the stresses to try to approximate the ultimate goal of racing, but to do so in a sequential fashion that's going to allow the athlete to experience some success without being overwhelmed. So you can just move right on up from single stroke rowing to pause drills to continuous rowing at moderate pressure, higher pressure, full pressure, and at the same time be building the cadences up into your desired racing cadence. Having discussed the advantages of using an ergometer to teach better rowing, we should also recognize that there are some disadvantages. A couple things we've got to be cautious about with the erg. First and foremost is that the erg is a standard size and our athletes are not. This is the same machine used by the US men that won the Olympic gold medal in Athens and had guys that were 6'6", 6'7", 230 pounds. And it's the same machine used by novice high school women who are going to be a lot smaller and a lot less weighty. So you've got to recognize that the machine has limitations depending upon your athlete pool. The more you know about your athletes, the audience that you're trying to reach with your coaching, the better you can use the ergometer. It's also important to recognize that the erg is obviously a very important training tool. And you're going to have to balance how much you use the erg for training with how much you use the erg for teaching. At some point, fitness is going to come into play, and you're going to have to recognize that they just need to learn to pull hard. If you stop them from pulling hard because they're not pulling right, you're going to handicap how fit they can become. That tipping point for where to balance those two is going to vary through the year and where you are in your racing. But you've always got to recognize that there's going to be some tension between training and teaching. It's also important to know that the erg is different from the boat because there's no acceleration. The handle does not respond in the same way that the oar handle does in a boat. And it does not respond the same way depending upon what boat class you're trying to prepare your athletes to race. It's a very different feel on the water in a fast 8 or quad than it is on the erg or than it is obviously in a single. The other element to keep in mind, of course, is that there's a tendency on some people's part to spend a lot of time on the ergometer. And it's valuable to recognize that the more time you spend on the erg, the more you run the risk of your athletes getting stale or getting a little bored. So when you use the erg, look for ways to be creative. Be inventive, and that's something that we hope to do in this video. When using the ergometer to help the athletes learn how to row better, there are a couple things you can do that are going to speed that process. One of the easiest ones is to simply remove the performance monitor from their viewpoint. Many of our athletes are really focused on pulling a good score, and they don't want to do anything that's going to hinder them achieving the split they think they should hold. As long as they're focused on that split, they're not going to be focused on making the changes you as a coach want them to try. Take the monitor away from them, and they're going to be more readily available to you to make the changes you're looking for. Another thing you can do is increase the drag. Make the load heavy. By making the load heavy, it becomes easier for the athlete to feel the stroke. If they can feel things when they're heavy, then you stand a chance of them being able to feel things as the load gets lighter. When they can show you good connection, good suspension on the drive, then start to reduce the drag and bring it into line with what you expect them to feel in the boat. It'll facilitate learning if you make things heavy. Another thing that you can do to help them keep the connection with the feet and to feel with their feet is to have them take off their running shoes. Most of them are going to show up at practice with a good pair of running shoes that were designed to cushion their soles. There's going to be a big heel that at the finish is going to push their heel away from the foot stretchers. These are great for running, but it makes it difficult for them to feel the action on their feet. Without them, rowing barefoot or with a pair of sandals or even a flat-soled pair of shoes, they can feel whether or not they're maintaining the pressure through the drive, and they can feel when they're getting the weight back onto the feet in the recovery. It's much more responsive rowing barefoot than it is with a good pair of running shoes. Having discussed how an athlete learns a new physical activity and the sequence of their learning, it's valuable to think about how you as a coach actually want to teach. What's the progression of your teaching for a physical activity? Well, John Wooden, the famous and extremely successful UCLA basketball coach, felt that there were 4 key elements to learning a new activity. They are explanation, demonstration, correction, and then repetition. So the first step to any teaching is going to be an adequate explanation. You've got to explain to the athlete what it is you want him or her to do. The quality of your explanation is going to be best if you have an understanding of what it is you want the athlete to feel as opposed to simply do. So I encourage you, hop on the ergometer yourself. Take some rowing strokes. Experience the rowing stroke. Perform the motion the way you want the athlete to do it. And then ask yourself what it is you're feeling. How would you describe what you're feeling? How would you describe your actions? And then use that language to teach the athlete how you want him or her to perform. Once you've made the explanation, you can then move into the demonstration. And this is actually where most of your athletes are going to learn the most. And that is with a visual example of what it is you want them to do. You can certainly use tapes of good rowing, of previous crews from your own program or tapes from the national team, but it really is beneficial for you to hop on the ergometer and show them yourself what it is you want them to do. They're much more likely to ask questions of you than they are to question what they see on the tape. Once you've explained to the athlete what you want them to do and showed them how you want them to do it, they're then ready to begin doing it themselves. When they begin doing it, they're probably not going to do it as well as you'd like them to, and that's when you as coach need to step in and help make some correction to their rowing. You can make those corrections on the ergometer much more easily than you can in the boat. You're not separated from them by being in the launch or on the tow path. You're right there beside them and can help them by making immediate corrections. Once the athlete has made those corrections, you're then ready to really try to help ingrain the habits of the good rowing stroke, to build those neuromuscular pathways. And the way to go about doing that is with repetition. They've got to perform the action correctly and repetitively over and over and over again. So some have said practice makes perfect, but the truth be told, the wiser ones have said that perfect practice makes perfect. They can perform the action correctly on the ergometer before they go out on the water, which is a more challenging environment. The first point of contact when we get into the boat is the seat. And obviously it's the same on the ergometer. You've got a seat, it runs on the tracks. How you position yourself on the seat is going to determine how easily you can move forward and back on the tracks. So you're looking for your athletes to be centered on the seat in a position where they can sit up tall. You don't want them so far forward on the seat that they're going to trap the wheels coming into the catch, nor do you want them so far back that they're going to be slouching at the finish. So have them sit in the middle, have them feel their pelvic bones, make sure they're up on their bones, not simply resting on their rear ends. Once you got the seat established, the athletes are always going to reach out to the handle, and the handle becomes our next point of contact. With the handle, we're looking to contain the handle and create pressure on the front of the handle. We want to make sure that we don't do anything that's going to have the athletes gripping or squeezing the handle. So encourage them to make sure that their hand falls over onto the front of the handle. Easy way to help them do that is to just have them swing their arm and get a sense of how the hand hangs down below the wrist and just slot that right over onto the front of the handle. Depending upon the size of the athlete, they may be able to see their fingertips coming around underneath the handle. If they're particularly small athletes, that's not likely, but for most college males, post-college athletes, they should be able to see that. Once they've got the hand established, you can encourage the looseness by encouraging them to just think about their middle two fingers as being the real points of contact. That's going to make it easier for them to go out to the catch and to hold the finish without getting tightness in the wrist or in the forearm. So you've got the seat, you've got the handle, and then we come to our third point of contact, which are the foot stretchers. And the key here is to just make sure the feet stay in contact with the foot stretchers all the way through the drive. They've got to be able to sit comfortably at the catch position with the weight on the balls of their feet. The heels can come up, and then they also have to be able to keep the contact at the finish position on the foot stretchers so that they can maintain the pressure all the way through the drive. When teaching the rowing stroke, we're looking for our athletes to move smoothly, a nice fluid motion. Very often we'll describe it as natural, asking them to move naturally. But I'm not so sure the rowing stroke is a natural motion. It's not something most of them have done before they've come down to the boathouse. On the other hand, something they have done that mimics the rowing stroke is picking something up off the ground. If you ask your athletes to practice picking something up off the ground, ideally something that's got a little weight to it, they're probably going to use their knees, their bodies, and their arms in a fluid, overlapping manner. Something akin to this. You're not likely to see them shoot their slide to pick something up, nor are you likely to see them throw their shoulders before straightening their legs. Now, if you can get them picking something up off the floor in a nice, simple manner like that, you can point out to them that that's all we're going to try to do when we move to the boat or the erg and sit in a more horizontal position. Let's take a look now at the different elements of the rowing stroke. You could break the rowing stroke into 4 constituent parts: the finish, the recovery, the catch, sometimes known as the beginning, and the drive. Rowing always tends to begin earlier than you think it does. So we're going to begin with the finish. The first step in establishing an effective rowing stroke is to establish a firm, solid finish position. Here you're going to be looking for the athlete to be sitting up, maintaining pressure on the foot stretchers, and holding their body in a position of good balance and good upright posture. The keys to this are going to be the contact through the foot stretchers and maintaining pressure on the front of the handle by virtue of bringing the elbows past the body with the shoulders down and away from the ears and the small of the back nice and firm. Now, at the finish position, what we're looking for is good posture and a strong position. Right now, this athlete is using the straps on the foot stretchers to hold herself upright. She's got the handle in such a manner that it's come in pretty high and the elbows have dropped down low. They haven't come past the body. The body has also gotten a bit dumpy. It's kind of slouchy. So to encourage a stronger finish position here, we're going to take a tool as simple as a broomstick, and we're going to ask the athlete to snake this in behind her back and between her elbows. And as soon as we do this, all of a sudden the athlete's going to sit up a little bit taller, the shoulders are going to drop down into a more relaxed position, the elbows are going to come past the center line of the body, and the handle and the elbows are going to end up in a fairly level plane. This is a position that you want to encourage for the strength that it's going to give the rower at the end of his or her stroke. Now we take the broomstick out and see if they can continue sitting up nice and tall like that and holding a good, strong finish position. We don't often see a good, strong finish position in novice rowers. Very often what we see is sort of this kind of praying mantis position where they've fallen backwards, the elbows have stopped moving, and the wrists are just sort of flicking the handle into the body. Now, to encourage a good, strong finish position with movement towards the bow of the handle, we can bring in something like this and ask them to row in such a manner that the elbows come back along the barrier and not hit the barrier. This will encourage them to sit up and to keep the handle moving towards the bow by using the stronger muscles of the back. Having established a good, strong finish position, we're then ready to begin the recovery. And the recovery is the process of letting the boat move out from underneath us and preparing for the next drive. We really can't speed the boat up on the recovery, but if we do things incorrectly, we can do an awful lot to slow the boat down. The key to the recovery is going to be the preparation that we spoke of. And that entails bringing the body out of the bow of the boat and over towards the stern of the boat, and positioning the body in such a manner that it's ready to accept the work that's going to occur once we place the blade with the catch. So again, we want to take that good posture that we had at the finish, and we want to transfer that forward, still sitting up. We want to keep the body nice and tall, we want to bring the weight from the rear end onto the foot stretchers, and we want to do so by having the handle come out horizontally. Once we're in this position, we can glide very nicely forward and be prepared to take the work of the catch. So if we think of the recovery in terms of preparation for the drive, the question becomes, what are we trying to prepare? We're trying to prepare the body, and we're trying to prepare it in such a manner that it can be used effectively on the drive. The key to this is transferring the weight from the rear end and the seat down lower into the boat onto the foot stretchers. Okay? Take a look at what happens when the athlete tries to stand up. The athlete naturally swings forward and transfers his weight onto his feet so that he can then stand up with a minimal amount of muscular energy. Now, if we ask the athlete to stand up without shifting his body weight forward, just by pushing as strongly as he can with the legs, we don't get the same reaction. He's trying just as hard, if not harder, and he's being less successful. Now let's take that and put it in the horizontal plane, have him put his feet on the foot stretchers here. And it's a good illustration of why it is so valuable to simply swing the body forward, sitting up nice and tall, and bring the weight onto the foot stretchers. You're going to have a limited amount of muscular energy when you race, and that is going to diminish through the course of the race. But your body mass is going to stay pretty much the same. And if you can use your body mass effectively, you're going to have an awful lot in store towards the end of a 2,000-meter race. In order to encourage the athlete to keep his or her body stable and still as they come forward, you can ask them to look in the mirror as they're rowing on the ergometer, or you can film them and show them clips of themselves rowing, or you can do a drill that's designed to keep their body stable. The key to this drill is to simply put one foot up on the foot stretcher, leave the other foot trailing behind merely as a point of balance. Have them move in such a manner that they come up and are able to stand right up on the foot stretcher without kicking the seat behind them. If they're able to do that, then they're able to keep their body steady and in a forward position as they come into the catch. On the other hand, if they come forward and kick the seat out, chances are that they're not holding their body steady, and you're going to be missing water at the front end. In order to create that body mass on the foot stretchers that we're looking for, the athlete has to sit up through the recovery as they are pivoting over. The lower the pivot, the more effective it's going to be, because they're going to have a longer lever on the drive too. But one of the ways we can get the athlete to sit up tall is by putting a bar on their shoulders, a good weightlifting bar, and ask them to assume a position as if they were in the squat rack in the gymnasium. As soon as we do that, they sit up tall, the small of their back comes towards their navel. We ask them to pivot over. They hold the strength of the back, they hold the good flat back, and then we let the knees come up and the body stays steady through the latter half of the recovery. Generally speaking, the earlier we have the body prepared for the catch, the better. So we want to have the body swing forward and well prepared early in the recovery. One of the ways that we can facilitate that is with a little drill where we ask the athlete to take one of their hands and place it high up on their thigh, and then to feel the contact both on the palm of the hand and the back side of the hand before they reach half slide with their knees. If the athlete can get that contact before half slide, they know that they've fully prepared their body, and then they can simply allow the wheels to roll through the second half of the recovery without changing their body at all. Another exercise that we can use to help encourage the athlete to pivot from down low in their torso and swing the body out over the feet is to have them row uphill. By raising the front end of the ergometer and having the athlete row uphill, they really have to get their body weight forward and get onto their feet. If they don't do so, they're always going to feel like they're kind of behind and that they might tumble off the back end. Early in the recovery, we've gotten the arms out loosely extended in front of us, and we've brought the body over. The arms want us to be in this long, extended position as we come forward and as we begin the drive. I like to think in terms of a rectangle. The handle and the shoulders forming two sides, parallel sides, and then the arms being the other two. If we can keep the athlete thinking about maintaining the rectangle as they change direction, we're less likely to see them go up and grab and reduce the work of the legs, negate the strong work of the legs. Think in terms of just holding the rectangle through the catch. Having prepared for the next stroke, the next drive, we're ready to think about how we're going to transition from the recovery onto the drive. Now you can think of the catch as the last motion of the recovery, and it's a good thing to do because it's something that's meant to be just as simple and just as relaxed as the recovery itself is. We're also looking for things to stay smooth, to stay consistent, to stay fluid. One of the ways that you can ask your athletes to get better at that is simply by looking down at their seat as they come forward and change direction. Have them look at it, and they will have a better opportunity to keep things moving smoothly. They're much less likely to stop the seat, much less likely to move the seat inappropriately when they're looking at it. The other thing that you can do on the ergometer, which though not necessary to help your erg score, does reinforce a good habit on the water, is to actually take a moment on the front stops to let that handle come up the way it would in the boat to enter the blade into the water. So you can break things down into a three-part motion where you have the recovery, the placement, and the drive. 1, 2, 3. A, B, C. Sometimes we'll call that the Jackson 5 drill. If you want to make it even more interesting, you simply slip something underneath the foot stretchers, something fairly fragile. We've used actually a tube of toothpaste with a cap off, and they hold the toothpaste in place until they've actually set the blade in the water, and then they crush the toothpaste. So they get the notion of the pressure building on the foot stretchers, but not actually becoming dramatic until the blade is in the water. That there's a real differentiation between recovery and the drive. Having placed the blade in the water at the catch, you're then ready to begin the drive. We can't really simulate the placement of the blade so well on the ergometer, but we can certainly encourage the behavior that we want on the drive. And that's going to consist of a good, strong leg drive with a firm body and a handle that moves horizontally in the direction of travel. A simple way to do that is to simply use a broomstick like this and set it up so the athlete has a guideline to follow, so that when the athlete rows, he or she can move the oar handle along the broomstick and get the idea of applying the pressure in a horizontal manner. If the athlete happens to be diving into the catch or lifting out of the catch, dumping at the finish, what have you, then you can move the broomstick up to the shoulder and ask him or her to simply row with the broomstick above the shoulder and not let their shoulder hit the broomstick or fall away from it. To encourage a good, strong leg drive, one of the things that you can do is have them row one-legged. The athlete's simply going to put one leg on the floor and leave it there, and then take strokes using one leg only. This is very good if the athlete happens to be one who tries to grab the handle with the upper body or swing the shoulders before they've really engaged the leg drive on the foot stretchers. Another good exercise to encourage a strong leg drive is to have the athlete row uphill. Simply raise the back end of the ergometer, and this is going to force the athlete to use his or her legs much more strongly on the drive. A good terminology here is to encourage them to stand up on the foot stretchers and have them move the handle with their body as they stand up. A couple things we can do to encourage the good connection that we want and the good suspension. The connection, of course, is making sure that the work being done on the foot stretcher is getting to the front of the handle. And the suspension is making sure that the body weight is evenly distributed between the front of the handle and the foot stretchers. A common drill that anyone can do on an ergometer is to simply ask the athlete to come into the catch position, and then you take hold of the handle as he or she presses and lifts herself up off the seat. If the athlete can get themselves up off the seat, then they're showing that they can produce an equal amount of force on the foot stretchers and on the front of the handle. If they can't get themselves up off the seat, then there's an imbalance that needs correcting, generally by having the athlete sit up a little bit taller and push more firmly. Another way to encourage suspension is a little trick like this. Just take some foam, place it on the seat, have the athlete get on, and they're going to use this extra cushioning as a way to feel whether or not they're getting themselves suspended off of their seat. It's pretty easy to do at the front end. The question is, how long can they stay off the seat through the drive? So just have them come up. And if they do this properly, they're going to feel themselves disengaging from the seat, but they're actually not going to come off so badly that they can't take consecutive strokes. When teaching the drive, one of the things that's really going to facilitate the athlete's learning is to slow things down and to make things heavy. Just by reaching up and taking the damper all the way up, giving yourself a good heavy drag factor, it makes it easier for the athlete to feel things. If they can acquire the feeling with a heavy drag and a slow pace, then you can increase the pace and or reduce the drag as they get better and see if they can pick it up there. So you get to the point where it's mimicking the sort of load that they might encounter in the boat you're going to be rowing. Another thing you've got to make sure you do, though, is make sure you bring the damper down and reduce the drag before you ask them to do any training. You don't want to train with an extremely high drag. Having established the constituent elements of the stroke, the finish, the recovery, the catch or beginning, and the drive, you're now ready to put them all together. You haven't got a rowing stroke until you can perform the actions in an uninterrupted, sequential, smooth fashion. So we've got to kind of play connect the dots. And when we do, we want to do so in such a manner that's going to encourage the rhythm and the ratio that we want the athletes to exhibit on the water. It's very difficult to find that rhythm and ratio on an ergometer because the erg's not moving the way the boat is moving. But you can do some things that will facilitate it. One of the easiest is just to vocalize that the recovery time should be longer than the drive time. Have your athletes count out loud as they recover. Set it up so that you require them to keep a certain ratio. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, drive. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, drive. Such vocalizing is a good way to encourage rhythm and to develop ratio. And you can change the ratio, you can change the rhythm that you want them to row with by changing the vocalization. Have them count 1 Mississippis rather than 3. Have them count 2 rather than 3. Each will lend itself to a different rhythm, a different ratio, as will holding different splits with a consistent rate, or changing the rate while holding a consistent split. So I've talked a lot about how to use the ergometer to teach more effective rowing. We can also use the ergometer to teach more effective racing. Obviously as a training tool to improve our fitness, but also by using it to rehearse racing strategies and racing skills. Most obvious racing skill is pulling hard. There is no substitute for it, and it's something that the ergometer lends itself extremely well to. Use it to set up competitive situations. Try to break out of preconceived notions of what a good score is or what a good split is. Just get the athletes rowing strongly and working on developing power per stroke and overall fitness. You can also use the ergometer to rehearse race strategies. If you've got a plan to move somewhere in your race, you can rehearse that on the erg by having them simulate that on the erg. They don't need to be doing it at full pressure. You could have them doing it at 2/3 pressure, but it ingrains the idea that come a certain point in time in the race, we're going to do something differently. And then it will be much more instinctive when it comes to that point in the race. You can practice your racing starts on the ergometer. Throw something over the damper that's going to make it lighter, get the sense of really revving things up and moving things with a higher cadence. The erg lends itself to that if you're a bit inventive. We hope that you found some of the information in this DVD useful, things that you can use with your Concept 2 ergometer to help your athletes become more effective on the water. We also encourage you to take advantage of other resources, the coaches that you work with, the coaches that you compete with, and even your very own athletes. They're the ones that are going to ask you the questions that can really provoke your thinking and get you looking at the rowing stroke and racing in a way that might be new and more successful for you.